Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 814, and today is June 26th, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. We have a lot to cover on today's show. I actually had so much that I kind of broke it up into two episodes. So tomorrow, I'm going to do an episode recapping the NATO summit, some other things going on in the Middle East, updates on Gaza. And today, I'm pretty much solely focused on the wind down, or at least the temporary ceasefire and pause that we have going on between Israel and Iran. I felt like those are the most timely stories, so that's why I kind of want to drive home and focus on today's show. If you guys can, share this show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute, reposted on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee for the video version of the show. Of course, it's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe to my other show, The Kyle Anzalone Show. It's the first link in the show notes page. Later today, 4:45 Eastern Time, I will be interviewing the great Scott Horton on all these topics and more. So let's jump right into today's episode. All right, so first up here, this is one of the more interesting headlines that I've ever had the pleasure to write. Trump attacks former Russian president over Nword. So President Donald Trump took aim at former Russian President and Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev over his warning that the country could provide a nuclear weapon to Iran in response to the a country, I should say, not Russia, could provide a nuclear weapon to Iran in response to the American and Israeli bombing of the Islamic Republic. In a thread on X, Medvedev listed what he believed would be the 10 consequences of the U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities last weekend. 1. Crucial infrastructure of the nuclear fuel cycle appears to have been unaffected or sustained only minor damage, he wrote on Sunday. 2. Enrichment of nuclear material, and now we can say it outright, the future production of nuclear weapons will continue. 3. A number of countries are ready to directly supply Iran with their own nuclear warheads. Trump responded to Medvedev, who is the current deputy chair of the Russian National Security Council, in a post on Truth Social. Trump wrote, "Did I hear former President Medvedev from Russia casually throwing around the N-word? Nuclear. And I'm not saying he had and other countries would supply nuclear weapons to Iran." The president added, "Did he really say that, or is it just a figment of my imagination? If he did say that, and if confirmed, please let me know immediately. The N-word should not be treated so casually." So Medvedev replied to Trump in a written statement saying that Moscow was not considering sending nuclear arms to Tehran. He explained, "Russia has no intention of supplying nuclear weapons to Iran because, unlike Israel, we are parties to the Non-Proliferation Treaty." He went on to suggest an unspecified third country could send nuclear weapons to Iran. And it's unclear of what question that would be, or if this is a serious threat. I guess the two most likely candidates in my mind, if this were to happen, and I'm not saying this, this is just speculation, I don't have anything, but Pakistan. And there were some reports, I believe, from some Pakistani officials saying that, Islamabad could send a nuclear weapon to Tehran, although not from anybody within the Pakistani government who would necessarily have the authority to do so. So I wouldn't consider that in any way a meaningful statement or a meaningful threat. And then, of course, there's some speculation about North Korea. I'm not sure if the North Koreans would do that. Of course, there is this kind of growing block that the U.S. has effectively created by going to war with all of these countries. The proxy war against Russia in Ukraine drove North Korea to have stronger ties with Russia, and additionally Iran to have stronger ties with Russia. Both North Korea and Iran have supplied Russia with, on the Iranian side, drones, on the North Korean side, soldiers, and maybe some artillery shells and some other munitions. And so it would be interesting if maybe North Korea was who Medvedev was referring to here. But at the same time, I do wonder if this was all somewhat of an elaborate troll on Medvedev's part to basically make the point that Israel is not a party to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel has an illegal nuclear weapons program. Iran, on the other hand, is a party to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Until at least very recently, Iran was part of or allowed IAEA inspectors inside of Iran to make sure that their nuclear program was limited to a civilian program, which the IAEA had assessed even up to the U.S. attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. So this is all, just a pretty interesting story and something that I'll definitely keep my eye on going forward. I don't think it's impossible that Iran obtains a nuclear weapon either through their own production or finding a third country to maybe transfer some there. Of course, there's other precedents here too, where it doesn't have to necessarily be that Islamabad gives Tehran one of their nuclear weapons. They can merely station some of their nuclear weapons in Iran, as the U.S. does in Turkey, Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany. And I believe Russia also does with Belarus. All right, so next up here, I have just a couple stories that are in more about the lead up to the U.S. attack on Iran versus the fallout from the actual attack itself, which we'll get into in a minute. This one I wrote for the Institute on June 23rd. Trump's 2-week timeline on Iran was another head fake. An advisor to President Donald Trump said his statement in the lead up to the attack on Iran nuclear facilities were a head fake meant to deceive Tehran. Washington and Tel Aviv deployed a similar strategy in the run-up to Israel's own surprise attack on Iran. Axios reported on Monday that Trump's statement that he would decide within the next 2 weeks to strike Iran came after the president had already ordered the attack on the Islamic Republic. It was a head fake, a Trump advisor told the outlet. He knew the media couldn't resist amplifying it. He knew the Iranians might think he was bluffing. Well, everyone was wrong. A second source, another advisor, confirmed the public remarks were a deception. The president wanted to buy time, he told the outlet. He knew what he wanted to do, and he knew he couldn't look eager for war, so all the folks in MAGA urging restraint gave him some space. And so, this is, I think, really important and something I want to really take a second to drive home here. Not only was this about kind of replaying the initial strategy with the Israelis and trying to get Iran to let their guard down and to not think an American attack was imminent and that it might come 2 weeks from now. And, there could be different benefits to that for the Iranians, like if they wanted to move around some military assets, some nuclear assets, some personnel, they might have thought that they have a little bit of a window now to do that. I would guess that the Iranians wouldn't do that right after I think they basically got played with Donald Trump's statement that the U.S. was still committed to peace talks and there was no imminent Israeli attack just hours before Israel did attack. And so my guess was Tehran would be far more careful with this statement this time around. And so the second target audience here that Trump was trying to deceive was his own base, was MAGA. That there was a lot of pressure. Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson kind of leading the way, but a lot of people who would consider themselves America Firsters who supported Donald Trump in the 2024 election, a lot of people very vocally so, were against Donald Trump and the Americans attacking Iran's nuclear program. And these people are very loud, they're very capable on social media, they have large followings, and they have a lot of influence in the United States. And to get them to turn down the rhetoric, Trump told the lie that he was undecided yet. It could take up to 2 weeks to decide. And I do think, at least from Bannon's angle, this did seem to turn down the pressure a little bit from the MAGA base on Donald Trump. American officials told Axios that Trump remained open to diplomatic solution that would have led him to call off the attacks. However, the president was demanding Tehran's unconditional surrender, and Israel had already launched bombing raids at that time, and so they're really the attack was going to go forward. It wasn't as if the Iranians were going to call Trump and just surrender, as they were still putting up a fairly effective fight against the Israelis. So Iranian officials did say Tehran was willing to return to the table if Washington forced Tel Aviv to call off the strikes, and once again, Trump was unwilling to do that. So while Axios reported the operation and public relations in the run-up to the attack was planned by Trump, Israeli officials speaking to the Jerusalem Post claimed that Tel Aviv significantly influenced the U.S. attack on Iran. The source told the Jerusalem Post, that Trump informed Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of the impending attack days before the American bomber struck Iranian nuclear facilities. After Trump told Netanyahu that he planned to strike the Fordow uranium enrichment plant, Netanyahu convinced the president to expand the attack to 2 more Iranian sites, that's Esfahan and Natanz. Additionally, the source said Israeli intelligence was used for the targeting in the strikes. Now, this is another, I think, really important story that deals with the lead up to the attack. Marco Rubio says it's irrelevant whether Iran decided to build a nuclear weapon. So Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Sunday that whether Iran had decided to build a nuclear weapon is irrelevant, as he pressed on the lack of evidence that Tehran has taken steps to weaponize its nuclear program. Rubio made the comment in an interview with CBS News when asked about the fact that the U.S. intelligence had no evidence that Iran was seeking a bomb before Israel launched the war on the country. Rubio said, "That's irrelevant. I think that's a question being asked in the media. That's a relevant question. They have everything they need to build a weapon." And so, just because a country has mastered the nuclear fuel cycle, first of all, doesn't mean they have everything they need to build a usable nuclear weapon, right? You still need to build the fuses. You still need to build some kind of delivery system for this nuclear weapon. Iran doesn't have a missile capable of carrying a nuclear bomb, which would be critical in any attempt to use a nuclear weapon. And in March, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard said there was no evidence that Iran had decided to build a nuclear bomb. And so, this is like saying that because somebody owns a car, that they're a potential drunk driver or something stupid like that. That's basically the argument that we're getting here. And even then, right before the attack, we had this report from CNN, which was of an intelligence assessment that said it could take Iran up to 3 years to build and have a deliverable nuclear weapon. So again, the idea that it's irrelevant that Iran was trying to build a nuclear bomb is simply untrue. If the U.S. and Trump is basing the whole idea that they had to carry out this attack on the idea that Iran was just a couple days away from having a nuclear bomb. If Iran's a couple days away from having a nuclear bomb, that means Iran has decided to build a nuclear bomb. And so this is very relevant. And if not, this is, if Iran wasn't trying to build a bomb, and even if they were, but the argument from the side that this was an existential crisis that the U.S. immediately had to act, we simply had no choice but to destroy Iran's nuclear program before they got a bomb. For that scenario to be true, Iran had to be working on a nuclear bomb. And so this is a very, very relevant point. And Marco Rubio is just a complete and utter hack and idiot. So next up here, report U.S. intel assessment says U.S. didn't destroy Iran's nuclear sites. And so it's hard to tell exactly what happened at Fordow, at Natanz, at Esfahan from the U.S. strikes. But CNN reported on Tuesday that an initial U.S. intelligence assessment has found that the U.S. bombing of 3 Iranian nuclear sites didn't destroy the core components of the sites and likely set back Iran's nuclear program only a few months. The assessment was prepared by the Pentagon's Defense Intelligence Agency and was based on the battle damage assessment from U.S. CENTCOM, and it could change as the U.S. gathers more intelligence. The report said that the U.S. strikes didn't destroy Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium, and the centrifuges were largely intact. The assessment contradicts President Trump's claim of the bombing of Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan nuclear sites as totally obliterated. So, the White House confirmed the existence of the assessment, but said it didn't agree with the findings. The White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt said, "This assessment is flat out wrong and was classified as top secret, but was still leaked to CNN by an anonymous low-level loser in the intelligence community." And so I think it's really important that the Trump administration is confirming that this assessment is real. Now, they disagree with it because the assessment disagrees with the president, but this isn't just some made-up thing by CNN. You know, it's good to be careful with CNN's reporting, but when the Trump administration comes out and confirms that this assessment is real, then it is something that has to be weighed, especially as it goes against the president's kind of political statements and motives. All right. And then this next one here, Trump stopped Netanyahu from breaking ceasefire and bombing Iran. I wrote this one for the Institute on June 24th in the morning that day. So President Donald Trump pressured Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to abide by the ceasefire with Iran. Tel Aviv was preparing to bomb Iran when President told his Israeli counterpart to call off the strike. A U.S. official told Axios reporter Barak Ravid that Trump spoke to Netanyahu in an exceptionally firm and direct way to pressure Israel to call off the planned attack on Iran. Tel Aviv said the attack was in response to Tehran violating the ceasefire by firing missiles into Israel. It's unclear if Iran actually violated the truce. So, the source said the president told Netanyahu what needed to happen to sustain the ceasefire. The prime minister understood the severity of the situation and the concerns President Trump expressed. Trump also posted a public demand on Truth Social for Tel Aviv to call off the attack. Israel, this is in all caps by the way, Israel, do not drop those bombs. If you do, it's a major violation. Bring your pilots home now. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. According to Israeli officials speaking with Axios, Tel Aviv agreed to scale back the attack as a result of Trump's pressure, but did not call it off entirely. However, President Trump's post on Truth Social suggested Israel called off the attack entirely. Israel is not going to attack Iran. All planes will turn around and head home while doing a friendly plane wave to Iran. Nobody will be hurt. The ceasefire is in effect. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And he again signs up Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. Trump, in a post on his social media platform, announced the ceasefire between Iran and Israel on Monday night, following Tehran ordering a small missile strike on an American airbase in Qatar. The Iranian attack was widely interpreted as a symbolic move to allow for the situation to de-escalate. Trump said the ceasefire was brokered after he was approached by Tel Aviv and Tehran about reaching a truce. And so this is why he wrote on Truth Social, peace. Israel and Iran came to me almost simultaneously and said, peace. I knew now the time was now. The world, the Middle East are the real winners. Both nations will see tremendous love, peace, and prosperity in their futures. I have so much to gain and yet so much to lose that they stray from the road of righteousness and truth. The future of Israel and Iran is unlimited and filled with promise. God bless you both. The implementation of the ceasefire appears to have caused Trump to become frustrated with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. He said, this is what he made in statements. This was on Truth Social. He said to reporters at the White House on Tuesday morning, you know what we have? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the F they're doing. Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I've never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. When I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. And so this is a really interesting story. And of course, I discussed it on the Kyle Anzalone show, but my interpretation of this is an example of the leverage that the U.S. has over Israel. And at any point, Trump or Biden could have stopped the Israeli war on Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen by making similar statements as he just did here. You know, a strongly worded phone call to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Tel Aviv is completely reliant on Washington for its military. And so the U.S. can absolutely threaten Israel to get them to stop doing what they're doing. It's just a matter of political will in the United States to do that or not. And up until this point, neither American president had that political will. And it appears that Trump actually found it. Now, I think there's two other possibilities here. One, it was Israel that came to Donald Trump and asked for peace. And so Trump was fairly upset. And there's some information about the lack of interceptors in the region, the lack of interceptors that Israel had left, the U.S. Navy had left, that would suggest that, maybe Israel was very desperate to get this war wrapped up and over with because there was little they could do to fend off from more Iranian ballistic missiles. I want to throw out this third possibility. I'm not saying that's true, but I am saying that if I were an Iranian general or somebody who advised the Iranian leadership, I would at least suggest this, if not say, we have to act as though this is the situation. We already know that Trump has used the media, has used public statements to deceive the Iranians on 2 occasions in order to try to get Tehran to let their guard down. And so imagine this scenario, that after the U.S. strikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities, after Israel carried out their early assassinations of Iranian leadership, now there's a situation in Iran where their missile launchers are well disguised. Their missile supplies are in deep bunkers. Their nuclear material is in deep bunkers. Their leadership in bunkers. And they're unreachable by American and Israeli weapons. And so, if this war continues to go on, sure, Israel and the U.S. could do damage to Iranian nuclear facilities that are above ground. They could do damage to Iranian cities. They could hit air defense systems and missile batteries as Iran brings them out to fire at Israel. However, if Washington and Tel Aviv's goal is regime change in Iran, is destroying all of Iran's nuclear material, then maybe calling a ceasefire allows the Iranian leadership to come back above ground. They're going to give public statements. They're going to once again let their guard down, and then the U.S. and Israel would have another chance to carry out assassinations and take on these people. All right, next up here, this one I wrote for JudgeNat.com on June 25th. Trump says Israel got hit hard. So President Donald Trump said that Israel took heavy damage from Iranian missile strikes during the final days of the war launched by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Trump made the remarks during a presser with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte before the alliance's annual summit. He said, "I think it was just a tremendous victory for everybody, including Iran. Look, they've got a country and they've got oil and they're very smart people and they could come back. Israel got hit hard, especially the last couple of days. Israel was hit really hard. Those ballistic missiles, boy, they took out a lot of buildings and they've been great." And so it's just a really wild remark from the president, and I think very candid and very truthful. And I think this remark adds some credibility to the argument that the scenario I think is most likely, that Israel essentially had to sue for peace here, that they were out of interceptors, that they couldn't turn back the Iranian missiles. And so this meant that they were going to be very vulnerable to Iran. All right, next up here, U.S. Navy used munitions at alarming rate to intercept Iranian missiles fired at Israel. So just a little bit more details on the lack of interceptors in the region. A senior U.S. military official told Congress on Tuesday that the U.S. Navy used munitions at an alarming rate while defending Israel from Iranian missiles during the 12-day war that Israel started with massive strikes on Iran. Admiral James Kelly said the acting chief of naval operations was asked during the Senate Appropriations Committee whether the U.S. Navy had enough SM-3 interceptors, an advanced missile that can reach space and cost between $10 and $30 million for a single interceptor. So Kirby told Senator Brian Schatz, a Democrat from Hawaii, "We do, sir, but we are, to your point, using them at an alarming rate. As you know, those missiles procured by the Missile Defense Agency, and then delivered to the Navy for our use, and we're using them quite effectively in the defense of Israel. It's also unclear how many SM-3 missiles the U.S. Navy fired to defend Israel during the 12-day war. The munitions were also used last year when Iran fired missiles and drones at Israel in April of 2024 in response to the Israeli bombing of the Iranian consulate in Damascus, and in October when Iran launched another attack over Israel's assassination of Hamas's political chief Ismail Haniyeh while he was in Tehran. The U.S. also expended a lot of munitions during its bombing campaign against the Houthis in Yemen. President Trump's airstrikes in Yemen, which lasted from March 15th until May 6th, were particularly violent and killed more than 200 civilians. Despite the heavy attacks, the Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah, were able to keep up attacks on U.S. warships, and Trump eventually gave up trying to stop them from being fired at Israel. And then, this report here from Didnt Camp, coupled with other things we've been talking about the show on the past week or so, that Israel was rolling out their own interceptors. The Washington Post, I believe it was the one that said there was like 10 to 12 days left of Iron Dome interceptors. We had the Wall Street Journal saying Israel was running short on Arrow interceptors. And then we also had the same reports from Middle East Eye and the New York Times. So there's substantial reporting of this. Now, on the deaths from the 12 days of conflicts between Israel and Iran, Israel officially reports, I believe, 28 deaths and about 3,000 injuries. Just a couple dozen of those people are in critical condition. Most of the injuries are minor injuries. Some people treated for acute anxiety and things like that. On the Iranian side, certainly more civilians killed. The Iranian count is above 600, although rights groups put that number far higher at over 1,000. So some of the fallout from what happened here, and this is another piece of evidence that I think shows maybe it was Israel who gave up here. Trump waltzed back goal of regime change in Iran. I wrote this one for JudgeNap.com on June 25th. So President Donald Trump appears to be rewriting his Iran policy, and now says that regime change in Tehran is not one of Washington's goals. Just 2 days ago, Trump suggested there should be a regime change in Iran. On Tuesday, Trump dismissed the idea of regime change to reporters, saying, "No, if there was, but no, I don't want it. I'd like to see everything calm down as quickly as possible. Regime change takes chaos, and ideally we don't want to see so much chaos, so we'll see how it goes." The remarks are a reversal of what Trump posted on Truth Social Sunday, saying it's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why shouldn't there be regime change? So there's some speculation that maybe this is over, maybe it's not over. Israel is saying that it's not over. IDF chief says campaign against Iran not over, but the focus for now will shift to Gaza. So the chief of staff of the Israeli military said on Tuesday that while a chapter in the conflict with Iran is over, Israel's campaign against the country is not, and that for now, the IDF will focus on the destruction of Gaza. And then we also had Trump saying that he'll bomb Iran again if Tehran restarts its nuclear enrichment program, but he doesn't think that will happen. Now, I think the problem here is that the White House continues to make these maximalist demands of Iran. And similar to Trump's 60-day deadline saying that if we don't get a new nuclear deal with Iran, I'm going to start bombing, I think Trump is putting himself in a position where Iran isn't going to be able to comply with the U.S. demands. I don't think they're going to end their nuclear enrichment program, particularly not now. But also, Trump wants Iran to agree to caps on their missile program, their ballistic missile program. And so seeing that talks probably won't go anywhere with those demands, I am concerned that we are basically just delaying and we're going to be gearing up for another conflict between the U.S. and Iran in the coming months, if not, sometime during Trump's presidency. It could be over a year from now. So the U.S. strikes on Iran led to articles of impeachment being filed against Donald Trump by Al Green, who is a Democrat congressman from Texas. And while Al Green is certainly not the sharpest tool in the shed and is a Trump hysteric, I think he actually hits the nail on the head with this one. In his articles of impeachment that were filed on Tuesday, he wrote, "In his conduct of the office of the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump is in violation of his constitutional oath faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and to the best of his ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional duty to take care of the laws be faithfully executed, and he abused the powers of the presidency when he disregarded the doctrine of separation of powers by usurping Congress's power to declare war and ordered the United States military to bomb another country without constitutionality, mandated congressional authorization or notice to Congress, contingent of the fact that there should be another country's military bomb a facility within the United States of America. It would be a de facto declaration of war against the United States. On June 12, 2025, the State of Israel initiated attacks on Iran, ostensibly to target sites and individuals of importance to Iran's nuclear program. Iran retaliated, and the conflict has escalated between Israel and Iran, though at no point did Iran pose any imminent threat to the United States. President Trump's unilateral, unprovoked use of force without congressional authorization or notice constitutes an abuse of power when there is no imminent threat to the United States, which facilitates the devotion of American democracy into authoritarianism with an authoritarian president who has instigated an attack on the United States Capitol, denied since due process of the law, and called for the impeachment of federal judges who ruled against him, making Donald J. Trump a threat to American democracy. Now, this was killed pretty quickly in the Congress. The Republicans introduced a motion to table, which passed, I believe it was 344 to 79. And one of the things I felt like that vote did is it exposed some Democrats who wanted to claim that Trump's an authoritarian, like Nancy Pelosi and Hakeem Jeffries, who are constantly wailing about how much of a threat that Donald Trump is. And here you actually have him, I think, dead to rights on violating the law and the Constitution. And he should be impeached and removed from office over this. And yet, when Nancy Pelosi has the chance to vote for that, she doesn't. Very telling. So, last article here, Iran takes another step toward cutting ties with international nuclear watchdog. So I wrote this one yesterday, June 25th, at the Libertarian Institute, and I explained that the Iranian parliament took one more step towards Tehran suspending cooperation with the IAEA. Tehran is moving towards severing its relationship with the nuclear watchdog group after Israel and the U.S. launched an aggressive war against Iran. The Iranian parliament voted 221 to 0-1 on the legislation that will suspend ties with the IAEA. Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagar Kouab said that because of the agency has refused to even condemn Tel Aviv and Washington's unprovoked attack on civilian nuclear energy program, the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran will suspend its cooperation with the IAEA until the security of the nuclear facilities is guaranteed, a move at a faster pace with the country's peaceful nuclear program. The legislation still needs the approval of the Supreme National Security Council before it takes effect, which it actually received this morning, and so I'll likely be writing another article on this today, either for the Institute or JudgeNap.com, just updating the story to say that this is now official. Now, other notes here, some members of the Iranian parliament allege that the IAEA aided the U.S. and Israel strike by providing intelligence about the nuclear facilities. Additionally, the IAEA's long-standing assessment that Iran was not making a nuclear weapon did not stop Israel and the U.S. from attacking Iran's civilian energy program. And so I'm guessing that in Iran, they see less and less reason to even comply with the IAEA if, when they certify Iran's not making a nuke, they get attacked anyways. All right, everybody, that's where I'll wrap up the show for today. Again, a reminder, 4:45 today, Scott Horton on the Kyle Anzalone Show. You won't want to miss this one.